Hello and welcome to Mind the Flat. I'm Tom Crowther.
I'm Amy Isles.
And I'm Chris Heffernan.
And this week we're going to be doing a podcast called I've Got the Power.
I got the power! Great.
That sent a major spike off on my microphone. I'm going to be in major trouble with Tom now.
I think it sent one off mine as well.
So we're going to be having a look at who the most powerful groups in society are, why they've got that power, what sort of power they have. But first of all, we're going to kick us off with a discussion about the time when we felt the most powerful. Go on then, Amy.
So, a time when I always feel quite powerful, probably the most powerful in my life, is when I get one over on my mum in an argument. Because my mother, I love her to bits, she's my best mate, but she's always right. And it's really annoying sometimes. And every so often there is an instance, and it is very, very rare. I think it's happened probably twice in my life.
Wow.
But every so often there is a time when she is wrong. And a couple of times I've been able to pick up on that. And I'm just like, yes, the student has become the master.
You're much more graceful in that than I am.
Really?
Thinking that you've only ever been right twice. There's
with my mum.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. I've had many an argument.
She's like as I say, she is my best mate. We do sometimes fight like cat and dog, but every so often I just get the edge, and I'm like,
bet she
yes.
absolutely loves those moments, doesn't she? She must think, oh, for goodness sake, Amy, I've said one thing that wasn't completely accurate, and look at you. I mean, it's like Christmas.
Oh, but you guys have met my mum, like, you know.
Yes.
So you're trying to implicate us in this?
I mean, no.
What do you mean implicate you? I'm not saying anything bad against my mother, like.
Go on then, Chris, what's yours?
I think mine is when at work, so working in a call centre as a senior caller, and when one of the callers asked to go to the toilet because they put their hand up, especially, and it's this idea of, can I go to the toilet? And I have never once said yes, but never once has anyone not gone to the toilet. So actually, I have no power, but it's the idea that they think you have that power. They turn to you and they go, can I go to the loo? And it's purely a polite thing. They're acknowledging your power and then going, but I know you haven't got any, so I'm going to go anyway. And it's just a wonderful moment.
Do you do that thing? Because I used to have a teacher, and if you asked to go to the loo, you put your hand up and say, can I go to the loo? And he'd go, I don't know, can you? Have you ever done that before?
I can prove it to you if you like.
I've not done that one, but I might do so now.
Go on then, Tom.
So my most powerful moment is certainly when I'm editing this podcast, because I can make you guys sound like you're saying anything I like. No, it's brilliant. I've got complete control. I can make Chris say something like this.
Rupert Murdoch is in utter control of the Prime Minister of the UK.
Or make Amy say something like this.
My mum is becoming a figurehead for the power of a nation. I was quite scared because there was just a gap of silence.
Oh, there's a gap, but there's going to be a gap filled,
no.
And it's going to make you're going to say something outrageous. I'm going to crawl through all of our podcasts, and I'm going to find a little snippet that I can manipulate, and you're both going to say something ridiculous.
Well, I already know which Amy's one should be. Removal of one word, and Amy will say, "We eat disabled people."
No, when did I say that?
Because you said we don't eat disabled people. Removal of one word, and you have Amy saying, "Not being funny, but we eat disabled people."
It's not a bad idea, actually. Making that the phrase, not the actual. Yeah, I thought we should probably move off of this before.
Yeah, one of us gets massively insulted or arrested. Boom, boom, boom. Mind the flat. Boom, boom, boom.
Right, so on to the discussion on who has the power. Let's have a little think about who actually has that power. Who's going first? Go on then, Chris.
I don't know why I put my hand up.
You put your hand up. For a podcast, that's a great little gesture. I appreciate your little... You asked me for permission then. I feel powerful now.
Oh yeah, you have the power in this podcast.
So, Amy, you're going to go first.
Brilliant.
No, go on then, Chris.
So, my powerful people are politicians. So, starting off with Forbes' list of the most powerful people in the world.
There you go.
If you look at the top 10, 5 of them are politicians. And in the top 5, 4 of them are politicians. So, there you go. Bye-bye. No. So, obviously the Forbes list looks at things such as how many people they've got power over, the amount of financial resources controlled by that person, the idea of being powerful in multiple spheres, and then people that are actively using their power. So they're sort of the 4 things they look into. And so I think politicians do have a lot of power. Now, not all politicians, but certain politicians more so than others. So the ones that...
You're going to say Trump.
I'm going to give you the ones that appear in the top 5 on
Right.
the Forbes list would be number 1 in the entire world on this list, 2018, was...
Xi Jinping.
Thank you. I didn't have to even try and say
There we
it.
go.
What a
There we go.
guess.
We'll have a little guessing game. So,
Ooh.
for those who don't know, that is the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. Who do you think came in at number 2?
Trump.
No.
Oh.
No, I think that's what's
Bill Gates.
Ban Ki-moon?
Nope.
Ban Ki-moon's not General Secretary anymore. It's
Oh, is he
Antonio
not?
Gutierrez.
Him then.
Nope.
No, got no power. No, UN has no power.
This is true.
Go on, Chris, who is it?
Vladimir Putin.
Oh, of course.
Oh.
Of course.
Number 3?
Trump.
Yep. Number 4?
Theresa May?
Nope.
Theresa May. No. Is it a politician?
Yep.
It's a politician. Trudeau?
Nope.
Trying to think.
Angela Merkel?
Correct.
Oh, of course.
And then in number 5 is Jeff Bezos. So, Amazon.
Yeah.
Ah.
So, you've got there 4 very powerful politicians. If you look at... Now, help me with the pronunciation.
Xi Jinping.
Yep.
It's really not that hard.
But I keep wanting to say Xi. Oh, it is. Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant. It's the second largest economy in the world. If you look at someone like Vladimir Putin, it's not just the fact that Russia is massive, that it has a lot of raw materials, a lot of which Europe is very dependent upon, but also the nature of the structure in Russia. So if you compared him as a leader within a country compared to a leader of another country, the structures of power in Russia mean that he has so much more power than someone in that equal position, say the Prime Minister of the UK, compared to Putin's position. It's a lot more influential.
So I would say
Yep.
potentially in Putin's case,
Yep.
yes, because he doesn't have those kinds of checks and
Yep.
balances and for accountability. If you look at Trump, for instance, he's been trying to build this wall for 2.5 years now, and he's pretty much gone nowhere.
He's
And
so reliant and restrained by Congress.
By Congress, and then even if something passes by the Supreme Court, like, there's so many checks and balances in place that actually his power is like he's just trying to build a fence in his own country as well. It's not even going out of his jurisdiction, and he can't even manage that.
Yeah.
And look at what Obama didn't manage to do during his presidency. There's a lot, and so they're kind of looking at the president of the United States and saying that they're the most kind of powerful person isn't really accurate. And I think that's why potentially people like Putin and Xi Jinping are at the top of the list, because they've got that kind of
Restraint.
more authoritarian. I wouldn't go so far as to say completely authoritarian, but they've certainly got those structures below them, like you say, that kind of support them.
But then Trump is coming in at number 3. So you've got probably there the idea that he has power in multiple spheres as a person, and I think this is where we might slip away from politician. I think Trump helps himself get there because of the other things he has.
Yeah.
I think he has fingers in many pies.
Yes. Well, I feel like there's something quite telling about the fact that the index that you were using with Forbes includes money and financial resources as part of that, and I think maybe the power there is a lot of the time with the money and the resources that a person has, as opposed to just their political capital. And I feel like political capital in that kind of circumstance is kind of separate to all of the other things.
But then people like, I think Barack Obama was also very high up the list when he was in the president's seat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think still the position of being the president of the United States of America as the world's biggest, I believe it's the biggest military and economic power, or one of, you have that global platform, that position in the world, do you think?
Yes, but I guess you've got to maintain that. There's a especially when you're looking at like international relations and that sort of thing, and how presidents conduct themselves on the international stage. If they do something completely outrageous, there's only so many times they can do that before they lose all influence on that stage. If you want to make a real impact, you've maybe got one thing to do in 5 years that you can actually do something with. Whereas if you keep demanding things of people, then they're going to stop. They're going to stop giving you what you want. And so, whilst America, in particular, has a degree of influence, if they kept trying to use that influence, they'd be draining their political capital, and I think that's something that is a lot easier to do than in other spheres of influence, say where money is, so in financial circles or the media. You can use the capital that you've got, the power that you have, almost as much as you like. There's a lot less of a restraint on that.
But then don't equally, I mean, Americans can, or nations can stop trade. You could, if so like what Russia did to the Ukraine, didn't they? They stopped, they cut off the oil, was it? They cut off something from going into the Ukraine. You can actively do that. America said to Iran, we're coming out of that treaty. We're going to stop this. So they still have, as a big power that aren't if you're not reliant on many other countries, but they are reliant on you, then that does give you a huge amount of power and leeway when you come into discussions.
Certainly with countries like that, but if you're looking at the interplay between Russia, China and the US, for instance, the three top ones on the list, they are reliant on one another.
Yeah.
America is reliant on China, and China is reliant on Russia, and so they can't just keep doing whatever they want. They need to bear in mind that
I think the singularity of politicians, like they have so many other things to consider. It's not just them that feeds into that power, I don't think, if you get where I'm coming from.
It's not just the politician that's got the power as well. It's the
have
state.
To take so much. Yeah, they have to take so much into consideration and they're kind of a figurehead for the power of a nation.
Yeah,
but then if you're, say, the leader of North Korea, you are completely in control of there. Like Kim Jong-un has near absolute control of the lives of 25 million people who live in his country. It's not just he influences their lives, he is in utter control of their lives. He is telling them what they can and can't do.
But that's of one country.
And that also relies on the people below him having faith in, and those structures maintaining themselves. And I'm sure there's many, many people under him that he still needs to keep happy.
Yeah.
He still needs to make sure that they get what they want. And therefore he has this kind of pressure to deliver on the things that he says, at least to these people. And if these people don't like what he's doing, they probably could, to some extent, do something about it. It's the fact that they are probably so infatuated with him that they're not. And I think, obviously, that's the kind of topple of control is a lot easier to do in an authoritarian regime compared to a democracy. So, like, you've got more pressures in a democracy to make sure that you're not doing these controlling things, but in an autocracy, you have fewer pressures. But when those pressures are applied, it can be catastrophic for the leader, and so there's a give and take in both.
So you're saying that the potential of failure lessens the amount of power you have, because in the moment, surely, if you're saying that the threat of being got rid of lessens your power. Then.
Yeah. I think it does. And if
that's
you
the whole
throughout,
point. That's the point of it. Yeah.
And if you look throughout history, there are so many leaders who have failed because they've faced mutiny and they haven't done everything in their power to keep a majority happy.
Okay. Well, we'll see where we go on to the next ones then.
Go on, Amy. Do you
both of you are looking at me. So I've taken the media as kind of the most powerful force in our society, because kind of going on from your point, Chris, I don't think half of these people, or the singular people, would have the power that they do without A, the mass media, and B, social media as well. I think is becoming such a prominent force. It's how, if you look at like recent elections, it's how politicians get their votes nowadays. It's how they reach people, and I think it just gives them so much of that power. And like all this stuff with fake news that's coming out, I think that just goes to prove the influence of A, the media, and B, especially social media, because it can, like that what was that social media, the scary face thing that had been scaring kids, Momo.
I have no idea.
So there was
I'm completely lost here.
So a couple of weeks ago there was this thing going round that it was this picture of this it looked a bit like a doll. It had these really big eyes. It was like something out of a horror film basically, and it had been sent round to like young teenagers, and I think it started on WhatsApp or something. And it was asking them to do all these tasks like self-harming and stuff like that, or otherwise it would come and kill you in your sleep. And social media just kind of exploded apparently around it, and it was like, oh, these kids are like harming themselves. And then there was a big inquiry into whether it was fake news and whether kids were really taking this seriously, because there hadn't been any reported incidents.
It's not that this thing itself had power, but the fact that the media portrayed it as being
the reaction
hideous thing that was damaging children, whereas actually it's likely not to have had any impact at all. I think
it's just causing outrage. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely some kind of... It definitely shows that there is a degree of power from the media. Because, I mean, if a reputable media source tomorrow turned around and said, oh, this has happened, even if it hadn't, something had happened, like there's a massive hole that's opened up across Manchester and all the people in Manchester have fallen in.
Yeah.
If the Guardian said that, or the Telegraph said that, you'd think... You wouldn't. Yeah. You just think
this Momo thing reached BBC News.
Yeah, there's a huge hole in Manchester and people have fallen into it. Like you can say anything, can't you?
But equally, do you not think that if a reputable politician stood up and in a speech said something, so for example, stood up and said that climate change will kill half the world's population by 2020, say for example, you have your trust in that politician. That politician is going to get a reaction from that.
But then I think the media can take it and they can either portray it and give it backing to make it even more powerful, or they can take it and twist it.
Or ignore it. Or completely. They choose, like, the politicians say stuff all day, every day. But we only hear a very select amount, or what the media deems as important.
What the media chooses.
Yeah, certainly. And so...
But what my second thing to that is that you say that we trust them, we trust whatever a reputable media would say. But, I mean, the News of the World is no longer with us. The News of the World, massive media, it was run by Rupert Murdoch, who many would say is one of the most powerful media moguls.
Yeah.
It no longer exists.
I feel like the media falls down in a very similar way to the way the idea of politician power falls down, in that the media does rely on trust. There is a degree of trust there. And if, for instance, the Guardian or the Telegraph said a massive hole had opened up over Manchester and it hadn't, the next day, who would buy the Guardian? Like, who would ever trust anything that newspaper ever said again?
You've lost the power.
So you've got both. So with politicians, you've got political capital, and with the media, you've got trust. And if those two are abused, then there is no power, and they rely on people's trust and in them to have that kind of influence.
But I think people are more likely. I think the media is something that people are more likely to stick with than politicians, because the media takes things like politicians and different subjects and has an opinion on them. And I think that's the thing, like, opinions are so varied in society, although you might lose some followers or some fans or whatever you want to call them, I don't know the right word. Audience. Thank you, Tom. You might lose some audience for a statement that your media outlet makes. You'll gain some others because opinions keep changing, and it is the media that shapes and influences that.
I feel like the power that the media has is more insidious than the power that politicians have, because you don't know. It's the information. It's the idea that they control that information, and that, let's face it, they're not going to say something that is completely and utterly, like, at least the reputable sources, the ones that have got this trust, aren't going to say, "Oh, this has happened," when it hadn't. But they might put a spin on something. They might hold back on some information. They might put a specific amount of one agenda out but it's that more insidious nature of it that you don't know what they're holding back, and that's the scary thing.
I think the media as well, sorry Chris, just quickly, I think the media has that capacity to be sensationalist when it wants or needs to be, whereas politicians have to maintain some sense of neutrality sometimes to be able to maintain their audience.
Well, or professionalism, maybe not neutrality.
Yeah, good point.
And I would say actually there are probably a lot of politicians that do use sensationalism. I mean, look at Nigel Farage and what he's achieved.
Very true. Yeah, good point.
So, yeah.
But I would say that we are talking here quite openly about the fact the media are sensationalist, they can twist things, we all have different opinions. We all know this. So it's not like this is some sort of hidden, surreptitious power that we're not aware of. I think especially nowadays, we're very aware that when you read something, this is an opinion. And many people will go and will not read one article necessarily. They'll think, hang on, is this complete? And so the power of the media is an influence. It can have this spark, but equally we can step away and go, actually, no thank you. I think you're being sensationalist there. I think this. Whereas if you are in, say, North Korea, you can't just step away and go, actually, no, I am going to access the internet today.
So I certainly think that to some extent, yes, the media has more checks in this kind of society, but on the flip side, I don't agree with your statement that people do go and check. I mean, I'm even aware of the fact that I'll often just read a headline, take it for granted, not look at the context, and just keep scrolling on whatever I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Like if a headline comes up on Twitter and says something, I'm not going to go every single time oh, I need to make sure that the context is, I completely understand the context and it's 100% truthful and 100% genuine. I just read it, take it for granted, and move on. And I'm someone that studies politics.
But you're aware of its
I'm aware, but I don't think that it doesn't
truth.
affect me. I think it would be naive to think that even with this understanding, it doesn't have an effect, and it doesn't have a substantial effect. I ultimately am a product of my own environment, and if my own environment is telling me something, then to some extent I'm going to believe that, and I think you kind of have to come to terms with that.
And I think the other thing with media is that it's constant. Like and again, going back to social media, you access it a lot more frequently than you do the words of politicians, because it's broader than that. It covers broader areas, and so you might access it in one way and then access it in another. Whereas politics, you don't access that.
You consume it through the media.
Yeah,
ultimately.
exactly.
Yeah. I think we should probably move on to the final discussion now.
Yeah.
So I've had a look at kind of the idea of business being quite pervasive, and in particular, I think this has a lot of control in kind of Western capitalist societies. Obviously, in societies like the ones that you've been talking about, Chris, there is less of a pervasive influence of money and kind of capital. But I mean, we a lot of the time actually here we've been talking about kind of power as a negative thing and power as control. But if we look at, for instance, people that have a lot of money that do good, and they have a lot of power to change the world in a positive way. I think we've not really touched on the positive influences of power. So, like, look at Bill Gates, for instance, the richest, or if not one of the top most wealthy people in the world. He's got the Gates Foundation, and they're doing amazing work in reducing malaria and having impacts in the global south and that sort of thing to try and improve the quality of life for a lot of people. And a lot of people would say that is a degree of power, because he is actively shaping people's lives. And doing so through the money that he's created. He's not a politician. He doesn't, whilst he obviously Microsoft does have kind of a foothold in some media-related issues. He's not gained that power because of the media. He's gained the power because of the money. And so I think that's quite a big thing to probably take note of.
But then I think we come to sort of the nuances of what it means to be powerful, to be sort of the most powerful person. You could come into it again and say, well, if a politician said, I'm sorry, but we don't want your aid in our country, then Bill Gates' power in that area would be diminished.
Yes, certainly, but why? If he's doing something positive, it's a lot less likely that that's going to happen.
Yes.
But also, money has a massive impact on politics, especially like in the UK and the US. Like politicians need funding. You can't just be a politician. And even in more authoritarian regimes, they still require money. They still need a control of resources. And if they don't have that money, and if they don't have that power through that money, they're not going to be able to deliver on the things that they're saying. A business has no checks. It doesn't have the kind of checks and balances that politicians have constitutions they have to live under, and media has trust that it needs to build. But businesses, so long as they're making money, so long as people are buying their things, that's the only constraint that they have. And effectively, if a country isn't delivering on the things that you want it to as a business, you can go to another country. Well, we've seen this with Brexit. Like, companies are going to leave the UK because they feel like that's not the environment they want to live in, and that's not the environment they want to make their business in. And countries are going to lose that money there, and it's the power of the businesses that are attempting to shape these policies.
But like politicians and the media, it is still this, and you can go to different countries, but you're still going to have this rise and fall of businesses. And like you have to have your consumers have trust in your product.
Yeah, you rely on people. So if say you had this amazing business that was earning so much money, but then you did something like you went and cut down 2/3 of the world's rainforests, and that got out, then you would probably get a load of your people refusing to be part of your company anymore, as in to be a consumer in your business.
I don't think that happens to the extent that we all want to believe that it does. I don't think like that because that consumer power relies on a very large group of people acting together, whereas the business power relies only on a few people acting together. And I think also with that, the idea of having trust in a product is separated from the power, whereas with politicians, the power is directly linked to that trust, and with the media, the power is directly linked to that trust. But you can have trust in a product, say Heinz baked beans, but that's not linked to the power that the CEO of Heinz has. There's a degree of separation that there isn't in those other two spheres of influence. If you get
what sort of power do you think Heinz has?
Well, I guess whatever it wants to do with its money. You know, it can invest in particular areas that it thinks is beneficial to its own vision, its own agenda. It can make political environments that it wants to see and thinks would be beneficial to itself. It can buy other companies or something and have extra power. You know.
I was just going to say, I don't know whether I necessarily agree that you do have that degree of separation, because I think the reason, and I know you're saying that it doesn't happen as often as we're perpetuating here, but it does happen. If a group of people decide to boycott a product, the buck stops with the manufacturers and the CEOs, because they do something that you don't agree with. Like, I'm thinking of issues like Primark, for example, when there was that big scandal when they were using like slave trade, basically. The buck stops with the CEOs and the brand.
If they hadn't turned it around and turned their image around,
their decision,
that business would have probably failed.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. And I think like with really outrageous things like that, certainly. But I think for the most part, you don't know what the companies are doing. Like, they don't have to be, to a large extent, transparent like politicians and the media have to be. There is a degree of opaqueness to what's going on, because they don't have these kind of accountability laws that other entities are subject to. And I think that's where I'm kind of going with the separation of the power.
But then the idea, two things. Firstly, you said about buying up other companies. Obviously, in this country, there are restrictions, so sort of like for fair trade. So with Sainsbury's and Asda trying to do a merger, that would give them more power, but then that power is monitored by the government. The government say, sorry, you can't have that because you're going to have too much power. And you see the same thing. This sort of brings the media and business together in something like Fox, because Fox has been in various deals to buy different media companies, which would then give them a monopoly over that media, and that wouldn't be fair. But you don't see in, say, UK politics, oh no, we can't have too many Conservative MPs in the House of Commons because that's going to give that party too much power. That regulation isn't there. If you get the entire country to vote Conservative and you fill it all with Conservatives and the Conservatives have all the power in that house, then there is no one to say, hang on a minute, you can't do that. Whereas both the media and business are tied to certain limits to the growth of that sort of
but then
empirical
politics
power.
is tied to the power of the people. Like,
oh, completely. But I mean, all three to a certain degree are tied to the power of the people. But if you can convince the people to vote for you, and you can, and that is showing your power of influence over these people to make them vote for you, you can have ultimate power. There is nothing that can stop you in that area. Whereas in business and in the media, the government can come in and say, no, what you're doing is not okay.
See, I think ultimately all three rely on one another. I think you can't have political power without money and media influence, and you can't have money without a functioning political.
Media serves the purposes of both politics and business, but likewise politics and business are reliant on the media.
Well, media is driven by money.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the media needs to make money. It's a kind of capital enterprise.
Yeah.
And so, I guess it kind of in conclusion, it seems almost ridiculous to try and separate the three. I think if the most powerful, if you can pick a most powerful individual, so like the people on that list, for instance, it's going to be someone who has control over money, politics, and the media. It's someone that can capitalise on all three because they're necessary for power. Power relies on all three aspects, I think. Yeah.
And they are all subject to the whim of the people because you've got to keep them happy to stay in power.
Unless you're in North Korea.
Sorry.
Boom, boom, boom. Thank you very much for listening.
And if you want to get in contact, you can find us on Facebook. We're Mind the Flat Podcast.
On Twitter, we're at mindtheflat_pod.
And Instagram at mindtheflat_podcast.
And if you want to respond to anything we've said in this episode or suggest a topic for another week, you can head to our Reddit, that's r/mindtheflat.
Or alternatively, you can drop us an email at mindtheflatpodcast@gmail.com.